Hey everybody, it's Dr. Anthony G. Beck, and today is going to be a fun day because I'm here with a good friend of mine, a fellow critical thinker who a couple years back reached out to me to collaborate on being a little bit of a contributor to a book of his, which I'm going to share with you guys here in just a little bit. But without getting into any further ado and things like that, what I'm going to do is just going to welcome in my buddy Nick and have him introduce himself to you guys and tell you a little bit more about him. Nick, what's up, brother?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Anthony. It's been an amazing journey, learning a little bit more or getting more COVID clarity with you in the last few weeks. But it had been a few years since we communicated, basically, and I used to just write online mainly about food, but I've steered away from that because in 2016 I really dove into EMFs and I wrote what is at the moment the best rated book on the topic of electromagnetic radiation and how it affects us. It's called The Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs. And since then, I became a huge advocate for safe technologies, talking about, the different tools we can use, red light therapy and whatnot. And that's really the direction I'm going towards now is the bad technologies like EMFs and the Internet of Things, 5G and whatnot, but also the good technologies we can use because there's a lot of medical applications for certain EMFs, and that's not to be taken lightly. I think a lot of these are extremely promising, and I want to navigate through that because there's a lot of misinformation. But COVID,
Right.
I didn't want to address COVID at all. Even with my background, I've been writing online for 10 years. My background is copywriting for TV originally almost 10 years ago now. But I've just been writing and researching. So you could say I'm just a self-made researcher. So some people will say, "Oh, no credibility. I don't have any diploma or anything like that." But I think I'm a pretty rational thinker. I'm able to summarize a lot of information, and yet, when I heard about COVID, I was in Osaka in Japan, and my wife was starting to tell me about all these things that were happening in Quebec, the kind of panic in North America. But in Japan, we didn't really see it. Half of the people in Japan, year in, year out, have these masks on. So it's not like we were in the middle of a panic in Japan. And she told me, well, it's pretty bad. Maybe we need to cancel our trip. And I was like, what are you talking about? What is this thing? I don't
Right.
listen to, I don't listen to CNN. I don't listen to like the mainstream media that much. So I got caught off guard. And that's
Sure.
how I started my article on COVID, which we'll be able to share somewhere around this video. But I got
Well, and that's the
caught
thing.
off
So
guard.
let me for
Yeah.
the audience that's watching this. That's what we're going to jump into today.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so we take a few first couple of minutes here at the beginning of the video, kind of let you know what this is going to be about, so you can decide if you want to listen in or whatever. The
Exactly.
cool thing about this is you and I have a history together. You have a very nice, appreciated background in looking at things, doing research, and then putting ideas and thoughts onto paper. You and I have talked here recently in the group that I actually have over on Facebook. If you guys want to check that out, because I know I'm going to be sharing this with that group and the people who followed my work over the years, and you're going to be sharing this with them as well, but they're all welcome to come hang out with you and I over there at facebook.com/groups/balance nation. But the neat thing about this is that I like to start off with the thought of like, well, where were you when you first heard COVID-19, right? So just like you were saying, a few months ago, or actually just a couple of weeks ago, as of today is April 2nd, 2020, the vast majority of the world never even heard of a coronavirus, right?
True.
So let's go ahead and just jump into a little flow here about this. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and set this up from the point of view that we both have different opinions, different backgrounds. Mine is of a clinical background. Of course, I've been practicing functional medicine now for 26 years. Tens of thousands of patients encounters. I principally train other doctors all around the world in my method known as Balance Protocol. If anybody wants to go and look about that, you can go to programs.balanceprotocol.com and check that out. There's a free program called Balance Protocol Prime that'll give you access to that and let you understand. The point of that is that we're here for rational discussion and dialogue about some things. You and I might have some disagreements on some stuff, and that's totally fine. But what we want to do is just really address the panic and the hysteria, and then really kind of dive into some of the aspects that are inside of this whole dialogue that the whole world is in lockstep dealing with right now, right? So why don't we go ahead and do that? So what are your first initial thoughts? So when you heard about COVID-19 and how did that affect you? And then what made you, being a gentleman who's looking into other things when it comes to things that we share, and you look to me on talking about this stuff before, and you did put together a great book. So we know that it aligns with the flavor of what we want to talk about, because the name of the book that you put together was called The Non-Tinfoil Guide, right? So It's not crazy conspiracy tinfoil hat stuff. It's just the opposite. It's the science, things for you guys to look at, which is why I was open to your request to get on here and do this video together, because I know you to be a rational and level-headed critical thinker. So without further ado, what do you think where we should start off on this journey?
Well, my first thought was this is not serious, because of course there's been scares, every year almost.
Right.
Another thing. I remember H1N1 in 2009, and there was a big controversy. I was just starting to go out with my wife. That's now we've been married for years and years, but it did stir controversy because our parents are pharmacists and they wanted her to get the shot, and I didn't get the shot, and it was like a huge thing. I was starting to see kind of the medical panic at that time, and in Quebec people were in line to get the shot. It was a very bizarre time, and the first thing that it reminded me of is like, okay, it's probably just a scare. But then very quickly, when my wife told me, well, flights are being canceled, we might get locked down in Japan, I was like, what? Wait a minute. When did it get so big? What's happening? So maybe there's a deadly virus after all, because if there's a deadly virus that has never been seen before, a new threat, well, it means, basically the response, if the response to that deadly virus was logic, my logic was, well, probably it's deadly, right? Because or else why would they be doing all these things and kind of stopping flights? And then the international community was literally freaking out. So I started freaking out. Yeah. And I started reading on the topic. And that's a good
thing to talk about right there, if we can just interrupt a little bit, because the thing for me is it comes down to, that's the big issue, is I want people to understand that we're all human, and we're emotional beings, and it's okay. But whenever you have a sense of panic, it's because you don't have information at the time. In other words, you're hearing something that gives you a thought. You start playing these things of trying to understand what's going on right now currently for me. What should I be doing? And if you don't have direction, it causes agitation. And then that agitation, left unquenched with information and insight, leaves your emotions to protect your mind, and you start panicking. And if you get enough panickers, you get a hysteria. And so that's the physiological, psychological thing that can happen. And it's mostly due for lack of information. And I'm famous, of course, for saying everything is about context cubed. Context, context, context. And you could have somebody say or do something in one particular realm in the absence of the context, and you might not know, from an outside point of view, what that actually equals, right? So at the end of the day, it's important for people to realize that if you find yourself in a panic, it's because you're lacking information. And if that prolongs long enough, you're going to really start having this fear overcome you. And when you have fear, it's also the lack of information, particularly context, and not knowing direction, what to do. It makes you very susceptible to control, which is why I say fear is the currency to control. The only way you can ever get somebody to control is they have to fear you. If you're not in fear of something, you can't control them, right? That's how that works. Yeah. So we do want to give credence and understanding to the response of panic, confusion, fear, hysteria. So absolutely. So you started, and it's great that you can admit that that's kind of what you felt. And then where did you go from there?
I was out of control. Just I don't want to overstate it, but I mean, I started having like thinking about it almost day and night, waking up in the middle of the night, kind of talk. And at one point, I said to my wife Jen, "You know what? I'm done with this topic. Like officially, I will stop consuming coronavirus. It doesn't exist for me anymore."
Correct.
I did that in the morning. That very afternoon, I did the opposite. I changed my mind. I said, well, I probably need to do the opposite. And one collaborator of mine who sends me a lot of information about 5G developments and whatnot said, Nick, I understand where you're coming from, but you're probably freaking out right now. He kind of saw through my game. And he said, well, you probably need to inform yourself more to get a real perspective. And exactly what you said, with more information, the more I consumed, well, in Balanced Nations, the level of conversations are always so amazing in that group. And what you were saying at it did freak me out, but for other reasons. Right. You were very calm and stating very early. I don't even know if it's early February or before.
Yeah, end of February, first of March. I saw it coming out of the box. I knew exactly what was up.
And I was wondering because again, I'm a critical thinker. I'm like, okay, Anthony G. Beck. I know his background. I see he's a critical thinker himself, but what he's saying does not make sense right now. So I won't take his word for it because, I mean, I will not just follow him as if he's my guru, right? Which is the classic mistake of people who follow me or you or anyone who writes online. It's like,
or particularly the media. Yeah. People who don't have any of that, the media is their guru. They literally, whatever they spoon feed to them, however you're wired, if you're more of a Fox News kind of person or CNN person or a Russian Times or whatever. We all have our confirmation biases, right? We have to admit that.
Oh yeah. And I'm a contrarian too. And that's something you tell about yourself. And I'm like, okay, well, dang, I hate him for it, but he's a contrarian and he's saying this thing is not serious. So I'm like, okay, what are your sources? And you started doing these presentations and I was listening to them and then looking at the sources themselves and then found other rabbit holes. And then I found Dr. Wodarg. And I remember that post I did on the Balanced Nation.
That's right.
I listened to Dr. Wodarg. He's this pulmonologist from Germany and he's getting a lot of flack over his calm, rational, science-based analysis of the situation. And all he's saying is this: if coronavirus was so deadly, why are not we seeing an increase in overall mortality in Europe, except certain areas of France and Italy? And that's it. The argument stops there. And I was like, well, what are you talking about?
And that's the cool thing. We talked about a couple stuff. One of the things that I'm famous for saying is don't believe me. Fact check my fact checking. See, and that's one of the litmus tests because it's if you can be told how to fish or you can be taught how to fish. If you keep given fish from someone, they're going to control you and the flow of the fish. If they teach you a skill set, you can now go off on your own. And that's the beautiful thing. So if anyone ever wants to look into, and like for instance, in psychology, there's something called thematic apperception. You guys have probably seen it. You see this picture, and do you see the pretty lady with the shawl, or do you see the old lady all wrinkled up? And they're in the exact same picture, depending upon how your mind is wired, right? So there is a certain amount of thematic apperception in everything. How we see it is how we're wired. And people that are in fear and panic and hysteria will tend to run to the same place where people, and whatever. People who are calm are going, you're running that way, and you don't know that the danger is actually coming from over there. I'm going to sit here and get a second and take action based upon knowledge. So I tell everybody, you can always determine if you trust your source is if they take a moment and do like what we're doing right now. And I'm saying, go and do your own research. Open your mind. Get both sides of it. On the internet now and in social media, you've got people who are saying things that are very ridicule of people who are dissenters, who are fellow contrarians, right? Like the doctor you just mentioned, like myself, and like, what you're saying is harming people. Okay, well, that's your litmus test that that person is fear, panic, hysteria, out of control, not a critical thinker. Because they've told me that I'm harming people. Then I would say, okay, how? Who? And by what matrix are you making a weighted confirmatory decision that who have I harmed? What, with my voice? Okay? You can't harm anybody with your voice and your discussion. The people harm themselves. So where I'm coming from around from this to bring us back is that there are going to be dissenters from the hysteria. and they're going to be calm. That is the nature of a leader. Leaders in the midst of battle are calm, collected, poised, and can state things very matter-of-factly, and they don't go and start blaming people and point and say, you're bad, you're bad. There's no time for that. So here's the thing. All I want to do, and you're with me on this, is to encourage people to think in a different way. Question. It is okay. You don't have to go toe up and lockstep with what you're being told on the media. So on that note, you're sharing the mechanism that you have found the power and comfort in by doing some research and shedding some light on some things. So that's why the call and the quest is to look and question.
And it's not one source. It's very dangerous. I mean, the work of a journalist or someone, a critical thinker, is not to find one source. So it's not Anthony G. Beck. It's not Dr. Wodarg. But the more I dove into it, the more I realized that there's nuance in what is in the media, and especially, in Quebec, in the U.S., all my circles, basically everyone I know comes either mostly from North America. The idea in North America is that, well, it's super dangerous. COVID is going to kill, I don't know, the CDC at one point said 1.7 million people.
At first,
these huge numbers, and the WHO, they are, I don't want to blame anyone, but
But we need to hold them accountable.
Exactly?
You said what you said. For whatever reason, we can get into conjecture on that. But that's what was said. And that would freak me out also if I didn't have my knowledge. I went, there's no way. Coronavirus.
It's a lot of people.
Dude, I'm like, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of coronavirus. This is nothing new. We've been studying them for a long time, and they don't have a strong kill rate. The vast majority of people on the population of the planet I knew have already exposed and most likely have antibodies to it anyways, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So I'm going,
exactly.
That's like somebody said, that person is going to beat you up with that styrofoam bat and break your bones. And I was going, some people, they'll be jumping and moving, all they do is they see a bat, and I'm going, it's styrofoam. It might irritate me, but it's not going to break a bone. So when you have that knowledge, you have this calm, this redefining of the threat. So the information needs to be shared, and that's what I think we're going to do today.
Exactly. And the big thing that did it for me after Dr. Wodarg, is that his sources, he cited colleagues because they started getting attacked. He was like the single guy on his island in Germany, but it turns out there's other people. There's Dr. Shukurit Bagdi, who one of the most cited research scientists in German history of all people. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You're one of the most cited scientists in German history, and they have a good history of incredible scientists. And you're saying basically that the measures we're taking are grotesque, absurd, very dangerous. He says
those are pretty good words. So
yeah, well, exactly. He's not saying this lightly,
right.
And usually most scientists are really they measure every single word they're going to use. So I really doubt he's kind of a fear monger, right? So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, exactly. It's part of this article, 12 experts questioning the coronavirus panic. On the video, you see Dr. Wodarg on the left, and Sukarit Bagdi is the one on the top. You have several other people, including one guy in the U.S., and that's one guy who really hit home for me is Dr. John Ioannidis, professor of medicine at Stanford.
Yep.
And this guy is a rational thinker, and he doesn't care what other people might think. Exactly.
I love his look. He's got that smirky little, Cheshire cat smile.
Exactly.
But he's been a bomb dropper in calling out the medical community and the errors in their science and their publishing and things like that. Absolutely respected in their field. So that's exactly right. So here we had 12 experts going, same thing I was doing. I was like, that's not how it is.
Yeah, they're saying, basically what they're saying is, wait a minute, how are the mortality rate, how is the infectivity, and all other characteristics that make a virus dangerous for this coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2 compared to other coronaviruses that are already known to kill a lot of people around the world, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only question, a very simple question in the end. And their answer is, well, we don't know since we don't have the data. Hence, the response right now is probably too early and based on
Right.
projections and
Modeling and stuff like that.
modeling based on the 3.4% that's been advanced by WHO, and this number has been said way too early according to many scientists,
And that's
they
exactly
called
what
it
my response was
irresponsible.
early. What was that?
Yeah, they called it irresponsible the way
Right.
the
Because I was
WHO
looking at the response,
yeah,
not the merits of the discussion. Okay?
yeah,
So it's the same thing as if you have, because I have three princesses, right? So, those of us who have kids. Do you have any kids, Nick?
I do. I have a 2-year-old at home.
Okay. So you got one. If you add another one, okay, what happens is if you see two kids get together who lack information, who lack context and life experience, you're going to think that they're going to kill each other. You go, what's the matter? What's all this stuff? And they go, she took my toy. You're like, really? The whole world comes crawling down because of that? Yeah. So it wasn't, these other, because listen, I am not an expert in virology and all these other kind of stuff. I'm a scientist. I'm a researcher. Okay. I'm a clinician. I have a view of when it comes to viruses. I'll share that with you guys candidly on this particular call. But the point is this, they were questioning the response. It's just like when authorities arrive, they want to go, well, what's going on? Okay. Because at the end of the day, it was the panic. It was the governmental response that made the red flags go over, because these guys have the same type of understanding as I do in that, hold on a second, we're talking about the supposed, cause of this doesn't have that power. We're not saying it doesn't present a health problem. We're not saying that it's not real. I said that the response and the hysteria was a hoax, not the virus. And what I mean by hoax is, in other words, it got generated and fueled and overblown. And I love the words. How did they describe it again? They said that it was...
what Dr. Shukrat Bagdi from Germany said is grotesque, absurd, and very dangerous. And it was talking about the government anti-COVID-19 measures. So in other words, the lockdowns and the extreme side
it
of...
It didn't match the supposed contagion at all.
It did not match the contagion, the death rates, and what scientists were seeing on paper. They said, well, what's new? This doesn't look as dangerous as other pandemics we've seen. And at the moment, the data that comes out every day, the more data comes out, the more it looks like maybe a harsh flu season, maybe. But it's exactly, maybe, and maybe it will be less. And if it's less, then we've made a grave mistake in the way we responded to this. Yeah. And I say we, I include myself in that because I'm part of society. But I mean, it was simply too much, and it got out of hand, basically.
Well, and then the next thing was, so then now came even more. Then we got 10 more experts criticizing the coronavirus panic. Right? And if anybody wants to go to these, all they have to simply do is go over to off-guardian.org. That's our source on that. Okay. So remember, fact check our fact checking. Very level-headed. You can read the pedigrees of these experts. Now, here in the United States, that was my frustration. We have a guy, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who just, boom, came out of nowhere. Now, I'm aware of the guy because I don't like the work that he's done with vaccinations and the AIDS farce and that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so I'm familiar with the guy. But then came to the podium, and then he became the expert. And then later on, we got another lady, Dr. Birx, right? They talk about the experts and these people, and there wasn't a whole bunch of them in there. And I'm going, hold on a second. We're here in the United States getting policy that's derived from decisions in informatics from a very small, dare I say, 2 on TV, couple of more on the back end, but we have international experts and people in their field with decades after decades after decades having a different point of view. And that's when I was like, hold on a minute. There has to be more. There's got to be another agenda. And that's where I've been digging deeper into things like that. But the message here is I need people to understand that there are dissenting opinions. There are other contrarians that have curriculum vitae that are amazing. I say, listen, I'm a physician, but here's the deal. Just, we're two guys. We're two citizens of different countries looking at this response from a contrarian, scientific, rational psychology point of view. And that's the message I want this video to be about, us talking about. Not trying to posture as being the source of the information, but the source of the mechanism to critically think, to question, source, and investigate deeper.
Correct. Do you want to start by comparing COVID deaths and cases to maybe other things that could look like COVID? Because that's I think an important thing. And I want to start with a quote by Didier Raoul, and he's a top doctor from France, rated #1 expert in worldwide in communicable diseases according to Expertscape. So that's something. Author of 2,300 index publications.
Wow.
Including, I think, 10 or 15 in Nature. So he's not a random guy. And what he says about the COVID interventions, he says that right now what we're living is a collective hallucinated drama that we're going through. And he says the data is clear. Respiratory infections kill approximately 2.6 million people worldwide every single year. And the same journalistic or political treatment we've seen for COVID would cause just as much fear if we applied it to any regular flu season.
Right.
And when I read that in French in an article in the French magazine Le Soleil, I was like, well, what can you say about that? I mean, compare how many deaths from COVID right now. We can argue about theory, but the reality is that we're still around the 50K marks of COVID deaths, and mostly we think respiratory failures and respiratory infections compared to 2.6 million worldwide. So exactly, we're it's so unlikely, impossible that COVID will represent something more than a blip in the stats of respiratory illnesses this year. So why are we still reacting as if there's a deadly virus outside the window and everyone is dying out there? That's really the question.
And that is the big thing for me also, right? Is because I'm an epidemiology kind of guy, right? So I've been working now for 26 years in the resolution of chronic diseases. So I'm a chronic disease guy, not an acute disease guy, okay? And of course, balanced protocol evolved out of that to address all the factors that contribute to chronic disease when it comes to environment, lifestyle, mindset, and nutrition. So you've got those 4 factors. And so the thing for me is we know here in the United States the causes of loss of life, the mortality statistics. And you can go to the CDC, and for decades it's been the same, and it's also relatively the same for the vast majority of countries. The first one, coronavirus, is actually I'm here in Florida. We got a lot of pollen going on. It is so super dry, which I'm going to talk about on this show here about why that's so good for us, because heat can't kill a virus because it's not alive, but it denatures the proteins, but more on that in a second. Number 1, cardiovascular disease. Number 2, cancers. Number 3, some say medical error. It's technically a little lower than that if you look at it from the right perspective. But number 3 is respiratory diseases. The 3rd leading cause of death in the world, and particularly in the United States, is respiratory diseases. Problem with our air, because what is it? It's a big environment. You do more air usage than anything else. Just do the math, right? Average of 15 to 17 respirations a minute times 60 minutes times 24 hours. There's a lot of that. What you're breathing has a lot to do with what your body is doing. That's the point. So we're talking about these respiratory illnesses, and then you've got enveloped in that, or of course the deaths from flu-like stuff. So one of the things I've been sharing, and you saw in there in Balanced Nation, were these statistics for the flu over at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it's very crystal clear to see that the CDC estimated that from October of last year to March 21st, look at these statistics related to flu. 38 million to 54 million flu illnesses, 18 million to 26 million medical visits for flu, 400,000 to 730,000 hospitalizations. Now remember, this is just in the United States, you guys. This is not worldwide. And then we've had 24,000 to 62,000 flu deaths in the United States just from October to March. Now, that's the CDC. Okay, those aren't my numbers. Those are the numbers. Okay, this is the light shedding stuff. So we need to go, okay, even if this COVID-19 disease, because we have SARS-CoV-2 as the name of the agent, COVID-19 or coronavirus disease 19, 2019, is the actual disease, if you will. The narrative is that it's not the flu. Okay, I believe it's mixed in, but more on that in a minute. But let's just say it's a complete entity on its own. People are talking about things like all the illnesses, all the cases. And I'm going, that number, and I've been showing the Johns Hopkins stuff. I'll bring that up now. We'll go ahead and take a look at what that is, okay? For the whole planet right now. I'm gonna do a refresh on my browser here. Give me just a second.
It's almost to 1 million now cases.
Yeah, it's almost 1 million cases, okay? So we're bringing this bad boy up. Just give it a second. We're using a lot of bandwidth here. So 981,000 here is as of April 2nd, 50,000 deaths, okay? Now, let's just put things in context, okay? 1 million confirmed cases. We're going to challenge that in a minute. 50,000 deaths worldwide. Look at the flu in the United States. 38 to 54 million cases with 24,000 to 62,000 deaths. Okay, that's a nail in the coffin of the panic. Wouldn't you agree, Nick?
It is. But again, what people listening to this might say against that is, well, what about the modeling, right? And I think the problem lies in one of the last videos you've shared is looking at the New York Times sliders that looked at the U.S. modeling, and it's clear that the initial panic, initial numbers shared by the WHO led to researchers and even, how can we call BuzzFeed called those the COVID influencers, Thomas Puello, and a lot of people who want to do good, I think, but analyzed these early numbers and did the worst case scenarios. And this article kind of caused panic because it was read like 45 million times. So wow. what ends up happening, is you base your initial your reaction on assumptions that very quickly did not become true. In fact, they were disproven very quickly. Yeah. The 3.4% of mortality was simply completely ridiculous, considering this is just total confirmed deaths divided by confirmed cases, which is not how you do viral epidemiology, as I've learned in the last weeks. That's not how you do it. You have a large fraction of people that are asymptomatic. So sharing that and people taking this as face value and kind of saying, oh, well, 3.4% times the world population equals the amount of death. That's almost the very simplistic, completely erroneous calculation that some people did. And then looking at the R0 number that were kind of passed around at the beginning, and even those were disproven very quickly. However, when it's disproven, people don't update their information, and all the panic is still based on these initial numbers. Yeah. But that was months ago now, and now if we look at the new numbers, we should find what you would describe as comfort and just say, well, we should be. Something I heard yesterday from Dale Bigtree, he had a great show on the matter. He said we should be in the streets celebrating right now based on, right. on what is happening, right?
Yeah, because here's the thing. What I love to do, it's just like this, and I use this with patients all the time. We always want to compare things. So in other words, yeah. Patients will come to me and they're like, well, my previous doctor, he did $10,000 worth of tests and gave me, 20 bottles of supplements, because they're practicing holistic medicine. You can always tell somebody who doesn't know what they're doing when they give you tons of pills, potions, and powders. And the thing is, they go, what's the difference between you? Because you say, I don't say holistic, but I go, well, here's the difference. Let's compare and contrast. So it's always okay to compare and contrast. We do that in relationships. Well, I want to make sure you're not like my previous girlfriend. Well, I sure hope you're not like my ex-wife. Yeah. I sure hope you're not like my last boyfriend. We compare and contrast all the time. When you're shopping for cars, like, okay, well, I've been buying this all the time. What's the difference? Okay. So we know that it's okay to compare and contrast as part of this discovery process. Here in Florida, we have something called hurricane season. Not only guess what? Whenever we have hurricane season, we have no flu season. Okay? Just blows it away. No. So one of the fun things that we'd have fun panicking about every season is the hypothetical hurricane stuff. This is a hypothetical hurricane wiki. And if you, basically, they use modeling. They use modeling. Same kind of thing. What you do is you put in data and you spit out what your assumptions are going to, or your predictions are going to be based upon assumptions. What do we have now? How is it tracking? So what do? We use data. We use historical record, and we use precedent, and also other factors that are happening now. So we do it in hurricane prediction, right? Which can have thousands, it can equal thousands of people dying.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is why this is important to compare and contrast. Every year we get these little things called spaghetti graphs, okay? This is modeling, okay? What they'll do is they'll track various storms and see where they go. But until they come off the coast of Africa and they whip through here, Florida is locked in this constant looking at the Weather Channel of where they're saying. And here's the thing. So check this out. This is fun for me, okay? Because this is the compare and contrast. So what do? We go to the National Hurricane Center and the central people who look at these things. And these are all the different models. Okay, these are the summary of the global and regional dynamic models to track intensity and wind radii. Okay, so you got all these models, data set assumptions, all these hybrid things of different So here's my point. We do it in medicine. We do it in weather. I'm not a meteorologist, but I love the weather. My wife is just absolutely in love with, storms and stuff in those movies, So I fell in love with it. And matter of fact, that's been a complete sidebar. I don't have ADD, you guys, okay? The thing is that one of the great things if you want to get away, because you and I are about solutions. So one of the solutions, if you want to get out of the COVID craze, watch the Weather Channel, because they're not talking about it. They're talking about the weather, and it's so fun to do that. So that's a great channel that just keeps playing. It's fun to detox from that. So watch the Weather Channel. Anyways, back to our regular scheduled program. Models are only as good as the assumptions you put into them. You can manipulate the hell out of them. And of course, they have to give you all these different tracks. And we're all going, oh, is it going to hit us? It's not going to hit us. It's going to hit us. It's not going to hit us. Okay? So that happens. We do that with disease stuff too. Those 12 experts and then 10 experts more know that. And they're going, we're dealing with something that we do have a lot of data on. Okay? And we have a lot of experience in looking at things. And this is a big, fat, empty barrel. Okay? So modeling is only as good as the assumptions you put into it. So I was realizing they're not sharing with anybody what their modeling is. Hell, in Australia, they're specifically denying open requests to show us the models that they're looking at. They said, no, we're not going to show you. Well, here in the United States, we have, but they're not putting it out in the public, so I had to go looking for it. So I went to the failing New York Times. Okay? Here's the model. Okay? So you can go there and you can go to it. And I want to show you what they're putting into it and why they're making these decisions. So I left it just like it is. We talk about people saying flatten the curve, okay? You can see the light pink is the infected rate. The medium pink is hospitalizations. And then the downside is the deceased, okay? So they're saying length of intervention model has to do with how aggressive. They have it set at moderate. They take into consideration the impact of warm weather, okay, because read these subtitles. Warm weather can reduce the spread of flu-like illnesses, but we don't know yet if that's the case for this coronavirus. Well, guess what? Historically, we do. We absolutely know that the virus dies in 80 degrees. Talking about that it lives on surfaces for days. First of all, viruses are not alive. Most people don't know that. They are not living entities that can replicate on their own. Therefore, they can't live anyways. They're not living on a surface. That should be a big thing. That's a statement. That's a claim that I just made. Go look it up. It's basic biology. Viruses are not like what people are presented. All these artist renditions of these like dog spiky chew toy, okay? Those are all made up pictures. We don't have a picture of that at all. And isn't it funny? It's a spiky ball. Ugh.
Yeah, it's very sensationalistic how
It
they share
is.
it.
But viruses are essentially a little bit of RNA or DNA wrapped in another protein with a membrane. And that's it. They can't replicate on their own. They're not going to sit there and live forever. Just like you can't say, I mean, hell, a steak sitting on the counter is more living than a dang virus is. Okay? But it can't replicate. So there's no living on surfaces. It is just a string of RNA, essentially. That can be picked up and brought into the body, and the body sees it as foreign and mounts an immunological reaction to it. You can pick it up off the surface. It can be delivered directly into the eyes, nose, mouth, or ears. Okay? So that's real. But hot destroys the bonds of the protein envelope. Okay? It's not. We can actually go to an old dinosaur dig, get into the marrow, pull it out, and have the same damn thing, stick it into beakers, and we can sequence the DNA. And we can amplify it through PCR and all kind of stuff like that. But anyway, back to the tail of the tape. Weather has a huge impact on this. Huge. Okay, so they have to put that in the model. Isn't that funny that they had to include it in the model as a data point? Okay, when did the intervention date start? And then now this is the big kicker here, the infectiousness. How many people catch the virus from a single infected person without, see how that's italicized, interventions? This is called the R naught, the R0. And estimates range from 2 to 5 people for COVID-19 or for SARS-CoV. For the flu, it's 1.5. Okay, so this is where the experts went.
It's debatable, highly debatable.
Highly debatable. So if we don't know, then we don't know. Why pick worst case scenario and freak people out? That's the question. Okay? So then now we take a look at, they want to say, okay, resulting in this amount of hospitalizations, they have it at 10%, and then the death rate of 1%. So if you scroll down to what the totals are, this is where they got the numbers. Okay? Using the settings up above, the model suggests that 126 million people could contract the coronavirus across the United States between January and October, with 37.8 million at its peak in June, and more than 1.3 people could die under these conditions, and 125 million could recover. Holy Nick Pineault freak out moment, right?
Yeah,
that
that's pretty
freaked me
much
out
what
too.
happened.
It didn't freak me out. I went instantly like,
a lot of people.
I went, no way, dude. No way. Because let's look at this, because this is going to set up everything that you're going to continue to talk about that I want to make sure you share with today. Let's just take one variable at a time, okay, and change it up. I'm not going to change anything but one thing, okay? The weather impact. The weather, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it down just to high impact. That's it. Just one stage down. Look what it did to the scale. Talk about flattening the curve. Now let's just scroll up and look what it changes to the numbers. 65 million contracted. Okay. 690,000 die. Oh shit. That's a big number still.
Still a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still. But if you continue to just bump up the weather impact, because I showed later, okay, bring it more to high, here's what happens. Goes down even further. 11 million peaks, 376. If you go ahead and take it to a high impact, in other words, peg it out, just the weather alone, you bottom out at about 300,000. That's still a big number because, of course, what they were saying is 300 to 400,000 if we do everything perfect. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what Birx and Fauci said. Of course, now they revised that. Now we're down to 100,000 to 200,000. Okay?
And they will revise it again, but they will.
Of course they will. We're not even going to come close. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reset the model here. You can see me doing that here live, okay? because I don't want you to think there's any shenanigans. So we're back to the same numbers. Now for kicks and grins, now remember, the R naught for flu is 1.5. Okay, so we're used to that, right? And you have to remember, okay, we know that that's what we have from a 1.5 R naught season, is these numbers I've already shared, okay? So you got to take that into consideration if we're modeling, after all, right? If we're modeling. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say, let's not even go to 1.5 R naught. Let's just take it to 2. That's it. We drop it from 2.5 to 2. Where's the curve? And I didn't adjust the weather, which was a major. I didn't change anything else in their model except the infectiousness of it. What in the hell just happened? Well, lo and behold,
I've heard a top Israeli scientist in an article that I just researched this morning saying it was 2, in fact.
Okay, I just set it to 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, there you go. 443,000 cases. Okay, at the peak in June. Okay, we'll have 2.5 million people infected. 22,000 die. Okay, you know what the flu season says? The flu season says, hold my beer. This should give everybody tremendous comfort from the panic. That's the take home. This is why, I love that Nick asked me to come on here and do this with him. Because people need this message. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're showing you the data. Remember the litmus that we talked about earlier, right? Go look for yourself. Question. Calm it down. Use their model and data inputs. Move the numbers. And then make a decision based upon that. If you still want to fear-mong it, 2.3 or whatever. Okay? Let's go to 2.
Yeah, we can argue. I mean, and in the end, there's no way to tell if we're going to be correct or not. But when you do modeling, it's important that you take a bunch of different opinions in the matter. Just look at let me find in my article, I talk about the different studies that have come out that have tried to predict, right? Because you don't know the real death rate until a pandemic is done. It's actually after the fact that you know what a real death rate is, and it's kind of estimated again. But people have tried to come up with the real numbers. Ioannidis said from Stanford, he said 0.05 to 1%. Something that came out in the Lancet from Verity and al. March 30th, 0.66. That would reduce by 33% the 1% that you use. So other from Stanford, Ben David and Bhattacharya on March 24th in their article, 0.01. They consider this less dangerous or less deadly than the flu. So there's different opinion, but even Fauci, Fauci said in a paper with colleagues, it was an early release on February 28th. He said much less than 1%. His words, much less than 1% case fatality rates. So why does the modeling say 1%, right? It's much less than 1%, in my opinion. What does it mean? It's not 0.9. It's like 0.5 or less.
So let's play with the model, Nick. Let's go back to this. Okay, so let's change those variables. I've reset it back. Okay, and all I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to change the infectiousness to 2. The R naught to 2, which is way more than the flu. And then what if we went ahead and increased the death rate to 4%, like, the other countries? Ready? Look at those numbers. That's still only 76,000, but people say, Dr. Beck, only 76,000 people? They want to attack me for saying that. Listen, in the medical field, we know that people die all the time. Happens. Hospitals, that's where you go to die. So we want to stay out of that. Remember, I'm a chronic disease guy. I want people to practice prevention. I am a preventative medicine master. That's what I do. I've dedicated my whole life's passion to that. So I want to save lives, okay? I do $250,000 a year personally in pro bono care for the military special forces, okay? So don't try to virtue signal me or try to put me down that I care about people dying, okay? Doctors killed my mom's pancreas and made her a lifelong type 1 diabetic. Okay, so I've got skin in the game. So when I say only 76,000, okay, when I move these numbers, I'm not downplaying death. What I'm saying is, even if we said the death rate is 4% like all the other countries in aggregate, and we just realistically get the R naught to 2, okay, these are realistic. That's a tremendous amount of comfort. That's way better than millions of people dying. It's way better than 400,000 people dying.
It's true, and it does corroborate, at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about all the scientists and Dr. Wodarg. This corroborates the fact that the mortality rate has not increased worldwide. That's because right. If it were so deadly, I mean, it's like, I think North America lives in a bubble, and they think that somehow the coronavirus did not kill millions in China, did not kill millions in France, did not kill millions in Italy. I mean, it was bad in Italy, but brutal. Again, there's a lot of other factors. It's like another
and I believe China lied their butts off to us. I don't believe their numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, they're historic. So data, history, and precedent tells us that China's a lion's son, second.
That's true.
So
but
given
anyway,
that, okay, I'll grant that latitude. Okay, but
exactly. But
to your point, you just made it perfectly.
Yeah.
No country has experienced. Are they liars too?
No. Okay. No country has experienced an apocalypse right now, per se, when it comes to total overall mortality rates across the board, and also overall mortality rates from respiratory infections in particular. So how do you explain that? Where are the deaths? And I don't want to downplay it. I mean, I'm touched personally by every death. I'm someone who can easily cry when I read a tragic story, and that this is part of the reason I actually do not partake in this whole this folly of reading every single death about, oh, this is COVID, or someone dead from any death in the hospital from the flu is not reported, and the media usually doesn't report on those.
Exactly
right? And something I want to address, and I know this is near and dear to your heart, and it is also near and dear to my heart, because I had someone I collaborated with. I did an interview with Maria August in 2018. I did an interview with her on my YouTube channel, and she was electro hypersensitive to and a bunch of other illnesses, and she was basically living in the middle of the woods. And we did this interview. She was on her phone and sounding very stressed, but always joyful. She was someone practicing yoga, Buddhism, and everything. 5 years before the conversation, she was perfectly healthy, and now she was on the verge of dying. Basically, the way she felt. And a few months after we talked, she killed herself. And that's the first event in my life that I can say I'm probably going to get choked up. But certain events happen in a man's life, and for the first time in my entire life, I can recall this and cry still, because she was a martyr of this condition in a world that doesn't recognize it as serious.
Right.
And the next thing I want to say, and it's going to be a shocker to a lot of people, but this is an important part of my article, is that the inconvenient truth is that social distancing and lockdowns will kill people. Yes. And it will kill people just by solitude alone, but also because of the increase in a lot of things when you lock people down and when you crash the economy, especially. Right. So there are certain modeling. Again, let's do modeling. Certain people argue we're going to have thousands and thousands of extra suicides every year in the U.S. because of the corona crash that they call it. Economists already call it worse than the Great Depression in 2008. So there's that. And I listened yesterday to Toby Rogers. He's a political economist, and he said his modeling shows that what are called deaths of despair, according to the Brenner model, that was a scientist who published that for the U.S. Congress in the mid 1970s. He says that, according to him, if the unemployment rate increases by just 5 points as a result of the lockdown, we could look at 300,000 deaths in the U.S. from deaths of despair. And this include cardiovascular deaths, people with more anxiety. This includes suicide. This includes homicides. This includes more hospital admissions for bad mental health, and prison also admission because of criminality goes up. So in this entire conversation, if there's something to be said at the end of it all, we can argue about the numbers, but the fact that in the modeling that is being used, we're not taking into account what is known as a known economical and societal fact. We have 50 years worth of data on that, and that's called a term, is scientifically sound, deaths of despair. When you're in times of crisis and you have 3.3 million people who already filed for because they don't have a job in the US already in a single week. And yes, the government will try to revitalize the economy, but the consequences of that, of taking these lockdown interventions, need to be discussed. And if we don't put it in the modeling, it is taking into account, it is ignoring it's putting our heads in the sand, right? There are consequences to the lockdown. It's like two levers, right? Save people, kill people. We need to talk about it, even if it's inconvenient and it breaks my heart, right?
Well, see, that's the realm that I'm in, right? So my philanthropy in my non-for-profit stuff is I take military special forces guys who come back from the wages of war, real heroes, and they're waking up in the middle of the night punching their wives in the face. That's not really good for marriages, okay? And their equipment doesn't work, and they can't keep a job, and they're socially isolated. There's a lot of that stuff. And the suicide rate is crazy. It's 20-some a day. So here's the thing. I've been attacked. I deal with that. You got to understand, I'm the guy who gets the call at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm the one who has to talk these guys off from starting a pistol in their mouth. Okay? So I got skin in the game. Yes, it tears me up too. Because here's the deal. If you go back to the numbers, here in the United States, right now, 2,026,000 confirmed cases, 5,300 deaths in the United States as of April 2nd. Okay? All right. That's loss of life, but people pass away anyways from respiratory illnesses and other diseases. I'm going to challenge that number here in a little bit. But here's what you really want to do. Go to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and look at the stats. As soon as somebody gives me a hard time for saying that losing 3 million jobs is not worth 5,000 deaths. Well, guess what? 6 million just filed again. So now we have unprecedented job loss for 5,000 deaths. My question, but people say, "Oh, you're just being a capitalist and greed and money and profit." I'm like, hold on a second. You start questioning my character, and I'm going to take issue with it. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. 48,000 Americans die by suicide a year. Okay? Let's compare that number to something. Okay? You know what a good number to compare that number to is? There hasn't been that many, or just crossed over, worldwide for this supposed COVID-19 hysteria. Okay? So you have to compare and contrast. It's not a fair thing to say that, because you know what will make some person take their life? Social distancing, feelings of isolation, loss of a job, loss of a marriage, loss of a business, inability to provide for the family, being driven to alcoholism and drug abuse to cope with a difficult economy. That's historic. And then now domestic abuse to kids and women particularly. Okay? So, and I'm not just saying, but when men lose their jobs, they lose their identity. Okay? When we're providers and protectors, and women, same thing. When you don't feel that you can nurture and comfort your family through a crisis, you're going to choose to do the exit strategy. Okay? There was 1.4 million suicide attempts. Okay? The cost is $69 billion. Now, here's the thing. If the powers that be put money to suicide, I think I can too. but in the prevention. So, Nick, you're right on board, brother. We have to think of the socio-economic impact of the panic of COVID-19. Yep. Let's say there's no conspiracy, sweeping the world, people are dying. Okay, yes, I disagree. But 5,000 deaths in the United States versus 50,000 suicides because people have no place. That number, I'm going to watch. This is going to go out of the news cycle, but guess what? I'm still going to have to watch that number. I'm going to be looking at the ramifications of this when it's not so cool for school. So you're dead on balls right. And this is why the other experts are saying, hey, we need to look at this from a different impact if we're making economic decisions.
Exactly. So if I can summarize, I'll have to go in a few minutes, but if I can summarize, the numbers that were being presented are arguable. So we need to have scientific, sound, calm, rational, scientific debate about, are confirmed cases really confirmed? Are confirmed deaths really confirmed? Are the case fatality rates that we've been told really still valid? And are our models based on information that is still scientifically valid? I would argue no. And my article goes into that in depth, and your presentations too in the group Balanced Nation. So that's first. The second thing, moving forward, I don't know when people are going to hear this conversation, probably very soon in your group, maybe later on my podcast, but wherever state we're at, it's important that when we take decisions that might affect every single citizen, for example, an entire lockdown and crash the economy, we're not talking about kind of reducing the economy 1%, or we're talking about a financial crash that market analysts are saying is maybe the worst ever. I hope it's not. They're going to try to do their best to revitalize. There's a few things that might happen. But still, if it's that, it's going to be very dire for a lot of people. So we have to look at the pros and cons of fighting a virus with lockdowns. And so far, it has not been proven to work in the sense that this is a new strategy to fight a pandemic. Even if it looks very dire or a new pandemic comes in the future, it is not necessarily a strategy that has been proven effective. Scientifically speaking, it's not. They don't know if it's going to work, right? There are papers about that, talking about the 2009 swine flu or the SARS in 2003 that say, well, unfortunately, after the fact, after the pandemic, we did not do the studies because it was not the cool thing to do, and the funding dried away. And this is what's going to happen after this, unfortunately, or what might happen after COVID. It's like, oh, okay, well, it's not in the news anymore. So we're not going to backtrack the data and look at countries that did XYZ intervention and what the results were, and what, like, is it useful to close schools? Is it useful to do entire lockdowns? Should we isolate the elderly, which is a small fraction of the population, instead of locking down everyone? So all these questions need to be calmly, rationally looked at. But right now, what I'm seeing is, I was sweating bullets this morning just posting my article publicly. And it just tells you the level of anxiety and anger that I was like, well, okay, maybe people that I think are super rational are going to come at me. Maybe I'm going to get sued. The censorship by Google, by Facebook, by all the platforms, they basically came together saying anything written with COVID-19 or coronavirus inside are going to be picked up by AIs and basically removed, banned. And this is simply unacceptable. So there's no calm debate that would help us see it clearer. Instead, the media picks up every single death as a new attempt to steal clicks and views and put people in front of advertising. In the end, that's a huge societal problem that has been highlighted. I'm grateful. I'm looking at it, Anthony, I'm very grateful that this has been such an exaggeration that after the fact, I'm going to be able to tell people, think for yourself. See what happened with COVID? See what happened? We need to fact check. We need to stay calm, stay rational, and I think it will change everything, but in a good way.
Here's the cool thing about that. That's another modeling. Go back to history, data, and precedent, and you know what you have? It's called slave owners. Slave owners didn't want anyone to be educated through the sands of time. I'm not just talking about in the United States. I'm talking about in other countries, stuff like that. In other words, if you keep people uneducated, then they'll be complied. But with that is also the fear. Fear of what? Getting beat, shackled. So when you want to know when you're doing the right thing for freedom and liberty is when you're censored. When you and the evil is the person who's doing the control and the censoring. Because I know for me, when I think somebody's an idiot, I go, let them talk. Because the truth shall set you free. You'll go like, man, let them talk about tinfoil hats for blocking EMR. What they need is a non-tinfoil hat guide, right? So the key is to understand that when you have, the people who are doing the censoring, providing you the information, those are the ones you should not listen to. They're not telling you to question them. They're attacking you for questioning them. That's your litmus test of exactly why you should question, why you should critically think, why you should dig deeper, and just don't get your narrative from the mainstream media and what you're being told. Look to other people who are rationally and respectfully not attacking others for a dissenting opinion. Nick, you and I are going to absolutely get some negative feedback on this particular episode. I'm glad you're going to put it on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to put it out to my nation, Balance Nation. And the thing is that but also focus on those who do want to hear our voice because we can replicate. Okay, I'm not afraid of the lawsuits. It ain't my first rodeo. You know, I've said I'm in the middle of three of them right now for dropping bombs and calling people by names and letting them know. Okay, so the truth shall set us free. But you can only be free if you desire to be and don't want to be in fear, so that way you're not controlled. And information is the power, right? Knowledge is power, as they say, but I also say that proximity is power. Stay close to people like us and those of like mind. You can turn off the other things. There's tremendous comfort in that. Okay? But then if you take that knowledge and you apply it, then that's wisdom. And you know why we love our grandparents? Because they're wise. They've been through it. They're like, oh, honey, it's going to be okay. Right? So this is what we got to do, man. I'm not scared at all. I have amazing comfort. And I've been saying that since the beginning of March. I said, guys, listen, this is all going to be over by May. End of May, the Scooby-Doo thing, and you pull the hat off and go, that was a nothing burger. That was a big old empty barrel.
Yeah.
You know, are you with
Summer's going to come by. We're going to have a beer here in Montreal, and
absolutely,
things are going to be different. And so for people listening to this, if you, I know it will be a shock to some people. Maybe you just got the red pill a little bit on that to use that analogy. What I want to say is, just follow the recommendations in your corner, in your neck of the woods at the moment. Like if your neighbor blocks you on the street and you cannot go out, well, let's just stay calm. Like we need to have compassion for other people, where they're coming from. Most people think that every time they have a cough, it's COVID, that if you open the window, you're going to die. I mean, I see now from very loved ones, the level of fear that they have around the issue. And sometimes I forget to be gentle, because now I have different information. I'm calm about the matter, but they're not. And I just got to say, you know what? It's okay. I respect your opinion first, and it shall pass. So in a few weeks, things will be different. People who don't have a job, we're going to need to support each other, support your neighbor, So on the human standpoint, it's going to highlight a lot of humanitarian closeness we need to have.
Yeah, don't be like them. Don't be like the panickers and the fear mongers and attack people for a different opinion. Say, listen, I'm glad we're at least talking about it. And the people who believe what we believe and done research, don't be militant about that either. Don't go, see, and this is why it's not a thing. Don't just say, listen, change your tone and your passion. No one gets motivated by that stuff. It's just like, just like we're compassionate, caring, and patient with kids because they don't know any better. That's how I look at these people. I instantly deframe and reframe it in my mind that I know why the person has fear and panic, because they lack information and life experience and knowledge, just like a little kid. So we need to afford them the same type of love and patience like kids. And I had 3 of them, so I know. And I was a scoutmaster for 7 years, so I got some experience with some boys and girls, right? So that's really important to do, and I love that that's your message. I love that that's your tone, and it just speaks volumes. This is why, I appreciate the chance for us to collaborate and talk like this, because yes, I know a lot more behind the scenes we can't cover on this episode, or we'll run for 5 hours. But that's the ending message: is we looked at contrarians, different opinions. We looked at the model and how the numbers skew the interpretation. We've taken a look at the fact that modeling has its place, but its flaws. We didn't go deeper into the flaws of the test, which we can maybe come back to another episode on that. It's greatly flawed. We didn't talk about these pictures of this supposed virus. They say the scanning electron microscope type picture that we see that looks like this, and we assume that that's the virus. Okay, when I'm telling people it actually looks just like another cellular signaling mechanism called exosomes.
Oh yeah, that's
so there's lots we could talk about.
Yeah.
In other words, there is a rationale and calming thing to go, what? I never thought of that. I call it giving people, when I train my other physicians, because I principally, as you may or may not know, is I train other doctors and health coaches in balanced protocol. And I say, here's what you want to do. You want to teach the controversy. Say, this is what your understanding is. Here's what it is. You make the balanced understanding. And I call that giving people orgasms. To where you go, So give orgasms, because right now we can't give, hugs with our O's. So that's what you want to do. Give yourself some orgasms, right? Be compassionate, just like you said, and realize that we've got the numbers, we've got the math, the history, the precedent on our side. Not this, palm reading, crystal ball, modeling, putting things into a computer, predictions. Go with what it is that we know. There's way more comfort in that than speculation.
And we have the precedent of every other country where things are calming down. Look at South Korea, look at Vietnam, look at Iceland, look at Sweden, and now look at Italy, who's starting to consider reopening the country since today, as of 2 years, 2 days ago.
A little bit of light, a little bit of fresh air. People need to get out of the house, okay? I'm not telling you to get in trouble with your area or the legal stuff or the police state will kick in. The jackboot thugs that are part of the slave masters, don't get me started. But my point is this: at least be joyous and laugh and be outside, get some sunshine, get connected to the earth, breathe, pray, meditate, hug the people that you are in contact with more and longer. Share that heart math, that field, that good EMF, right? There's so many things that we can do. The answer is not the pills, potions, and the powders. It's not.
Exactly.
It's human
and this
connection.
Is why,
That's what we need to get back to. That's the only thing that's going to save us.
Yeah. Amen. I don't have anything else to add.
Awesome.
This has
well,
been
Nick,
tremendous.
it has been a
Thank you so much.
blast. I appreciate the invite to come on here and do this. I'm definitely going to share this with Balance Nation. I'll be out there with a bunch of other folks and talk. And at the end of the day, man, this is what we got to keep talking about. We shall recover, but people need to rise up and think for themselves, right? Step out of line, and you'll get a whole different perspective. I promise you. Put that challenge to everybody out there. And until then, that's what we got to keep saying over and over and over, so that way people will calm the panic of the COVID-19 stuff. You with me on that?
I am calm, and I hope that the whole thing will calm down very soon. Yeah.
Just around the corner. It's blue skies
I think so.
Sunshine. I promise you this. 6 more weeks of bad weather. That's it.
Exactly.
All right, Nick. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, brother. It's been a great time being with you.
Thank you so much.
All right, buddy.